So basically, we in the last class we had gone through some vectors, how the vector calculus happens, how the algebra works out on vectors and all of it. And then at the last part we had gone through the Coulomb's law also. So how does the Coulomb's law work out and all of it? Now the basic fundamental is that how do we move ahead with the remaining parts? So let us go topic by topic and see how it actually works out. Okay. So this was the syllabus that we had. Just a second, I think so. So this is the syllabus that we had, and we have gone through Coulomb's law, we have gone through electric field intensity, and we have gone through Coulomb's law only right now in different formats. So just a second. Yeah, so now we will be going through the electric field concept. The concept of electric field was basically introduced by Michael Faraday, which we have seen later on also. The Faraday's law will come up. And according to that, the field lines originate or end at the charge. Usually we do assume that the charge is spherical in nature, and that is why the field lines will either originate or end at the charge. The usual assumption is that from the field lines will originate from the positive charge and they will converge at the negative charge. So the electric field vector is basically, it is given by represented by capital E, and the formula is given as F by Q. So here E is a vector quantity, and that is why the F that will be calculated will be based on a vector calculation also itself. Last time we had seen two kinds of calculations in the Coulomb's law. One is the scalar calculation, the other one is the vector calculation. So here we'll go for the vector calculation of E. So E is given as F by Q, where Q is the test charge. The unit for E is given as Newton Coulomb, and the other unit is given as volt per meter. So we can say it's like, potential gradient can also be brought in somewhere using electric field intensity. Now the point is, as far as the students are concerned, I'll suggest that you all go through some exercise and find out how Newton per Coulomb and volt per meter become the same quantity. Okay. This is where you will have to go and search out a little bit. This kind of a study will actually help you to move out and study in a direction where you'll be able to learn and remember on your own. Okay, so then let us go. We'll basically not go into the derivations here because the derivations will take a lot of time, and we cannot afford to go into that part. Otherwise, we will go for like hours and hours of a lecture. So usually what happens is F is given as Q1 Q2 by 4 pi epsilon naught, where 4 pi epsilon naught is basically 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught is basically the proportional constant that is given by K. R square means in the denominator you got R square multiplied by AR. So what has happened is that between the force in the Coulomb's law and the electric field intensity, there is a difference. There were two Q's in the numerator for the force, whereas for electric field intensity we have got a single Q. The Q which we are considering as a test charge is now not visible there. Okay. The Q which is basically applying itself on this. So that is not visible there. So the formula now becomes E is equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square into unit vector AR, where AR is the direction between the two charges. One is the test charge and the other one is the charge where we are trying to find the electric field intensity. Similarly, the first formula there is basically for a single charge. Then for a combination of charges, we have got the second formula which is there, that is ER is equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught summation of I is equals to 1 to n Qi Ri square. So this formula was also there when we were talking about Coulomb law because of a number of charges. This is electric field intensity because of a number of charges. The difference again here is that one of the Q is missing. Okay? So that is one of the differences that we have. Now here what you need to remember is that here the AR will be a combination of the directions because of each and every charge. Okay, it was not in the earlier one, it was a single charge and therefore the direction was not to be calculated in a very complex way, but here you will have to add it up as the direction from all the charges. So this becomes a little tedious. Then electric field intensity has got multiple applications when you go for calculation. And what we saw in the previous slide was simple Qs where simple individual charges were present. What will happen if we have got a particular combination of charges? So we get the second formula in the previous slide, this one, the second formula here. This is the formula that we get. But what if this combination again creates a certain specific what we say volume or some kind of an object? Then what do we do? So we have got formulas to calculate Q in a particular specific format, and usually when we say that it is a volume charge, then we say that it is integration of volume rho v dv, where rho v stands for your charge density, volume charge density, and here basically Q will represent a charge in a small volume usually. So then you can integrate it and you can find it out. The basic fundamental here again is that the integration will have to happen over, if you're going for volume integration, then you have to have it for, three integrations have to be done in all the three directions, X, Y, and Z. And rho v is taken up like that. Then you find Q. Once you have found out Q using this formula, then you put it into the equation for E, and then you can find out the electric field intensity. So going by the same line, what we do is we go for electric field intensity because of a line. So how the derivation goes here is you take up a point, and then you take up a point basically anywhere on the line, and we assume that the line charge is infinite from positive Z to negative Z, and there are certain assumptions which are there. I believe that the derivation will not come up in your examinations in GATE, so that is why derivation is not important. But in some of the numericals, what happens is if you don't know the derivation, you won't be able to find the solution to it. Now, let us first see how do we proceed with it. We proceed with it by assuming that the line charge distribution is uniform. The line is infinite from negative Z to positive Z. We also assume that the line is placed on Z-axis. It may be on any other axis, or it may be a combination of these axes also. So we are not sure about it, but we start with this derivation. And then what we do is that we take up a very small space on the line and we find the electric field intensity because of that line. So if you just have a look, we have taken a very small distance here on the Z line here, where from here to here we are assuming. Then from the center point we draw a line to P, which is the place where we are going to find E. And then based on this R, I know the value of R. I can find the value of rho also based on that, since the derivation will finally turn out into a cylindrical coordinate system. The final unit vector comes out to be in cylindrical coordinates. So what we do here is that we take up this particular point here. The position is 0, 0, Z dash. If you go through the detailed derivation, you'll find out how it comes into usage. And then we find the electric field intensity at point P because of this particular point. Once we have done this, in the process, we also assume here that the total charge at this particular junction is given by dq, which is given as rho L into dz. So once we have found out this dE, then we can integrate the whole thing from negative z to positive z. But there is a very simple thing that if the line is infinite, then if there is a point at a distance of z dash, positive z dash from origin, then there would be also a similar point on the other end, which will be at minus z dash. So the components that will come out for the electric field intensity here, because of z dash, is given as E rho and Ez. E rho is nothing but here it is visible as if P is on the y-axis, but it may be anywhere. So we say it is E rho, that is on the horizontal plane, and the other component goes into the negative z direction here. Similarly, if I take another point here and I find the electric field intensity here, then we'll have two components. One will be again dE rho, but the other component would be in the opposite direction to this particular component. And that is why there is this symmetry that comes up. And because of that symmetry, the Ez component is removed, and the only component that remains is E rho, right? D rho. So that is why we get the unit vector in the direction of A rho. That is the vector from origin to the given point in the horizontal xy plane only. So even if the point is somewhere above the xy plane, we assume it as a horizontal plane only. So A rho will represent the horizontal distance or the vector from the z axis. Okay, and this is what we get here. L should be at the suffix, so you get it as rho L. That is the line charge density divided by 2 pi rho epsilon. Rho is the distance between the z-axis to the given point. So this is how we find it out. Now what you need to do is, whenever you have got time, what you can do is that you can just search out what will happen if the line is not placed on the z-axis. Then how can we compare electric field intensity because of point charge and because of line charge? What is the difference between both of them? Then you can further search out as to what will be the effect of rho on E. Means if we move further away from the z-axis or the line charge, what will be the effect on E with the distance that we move around? So this is about electric field intensity. Let us move to electric field intensity because of sheet charge. Now that we know already about as to how a line creates its own electric field intensity, on a similar way we created for the sheet charge also. In a sheet charge, what we assume is we already have a z-axis which is there, and we find again electric field intensity because of that line, and then that line is integrated. So what we assume here is that the sheet is placed on the YZ axis, okay, YZ plane, sorry, and you know already how the electric field intensity because of line charge was found out. So once we do that, then we just integrate that line charge now, because the vertical integration has already been performed. We go for the integration in the y direction. The z direction integration has already been performed. That is why we found out the line charge electric field intensity. Then we go for the integration along the y-axis. So since the sheet is assumed to be infinite in nature, it will extend from positive y to negative y. From positive y infinity, you will go to the infinite, and negative y again up to infinite. And then again we find E because of one line, then we integrate it along the axis on a similar fashion as you do it for line charge. So you take a very small distance on dy, then you integrate it from minus infinity to plus infinity. Initially we assume that it is at y dash position. Then there is another thing called as azimuthal symmetry here, which will cancel out the rho also. And what we get is E is equals to rho s by 2 epsilon naught an. So E is the electric field intensity because of the sheet charge. Rho s is the sheet charge density. Right? Then Am is basically giving me the direction of the electric field intensity from the sheet. So An means it is normal to the sheet. Okay, An stands for normal to the sheet. So if it is a one, there can be only two directions now. If I am considering for infinite sheet, there can be only two directions. One on the positive side of the sheet, other on the negative side of the sheet. And it will be in an direction. Now here, if you are considering YZ plane, then AN will stand for AX because AX is perpendicular to AY as well as AZ. If we assume that the sheet is present on XZ plane, then AN will stand for AY. And if we assume XY plane, then AZ will stand for AN. Again, the density will also play a very important part here. However, what we can visualize here is the one of the differences that can be easily taken up, and that will be very helpful if you go for your gate examination. When we are going for single charge, the vector A will have 3 dimensions, AX, AY, AZ. When we are going for line charge, it goes down to A row, which will have only 2 dimensions, X and Y. If you are into cylindrical, then it will be only one, that is A row, that's it. And that too if it is on the Z axis. But anyways, in a general term, it will be 2 axis. And when you go for sheet charge, you only have got 1 axis. Now, the basic fundamental here is where you can, go out and really look out and expand your information is what will happen if the line is not infinite? What will happen if the sheet charge is not infinite? Then how it will affect the working of the system, and how do you find out the electric field intensity in that case? Then one of the other things, I don't know whether you'll be able to do it or not, but anyways, what would be the direction of E if the charge distribution were to increase in the positive z-axis direction for an infinite line charge? In case if it keeps on increasing as we move ahead, means upwards, then what will happen with E? So that is for you to search it out. This will help you later on also. Then there's something, one more thing I have just shown, but anyways, just for you. What do you mean by streamlines when you go for the EMF part? So you can just go for it. And the next topic is electric flux density. Electric flux density is the amount of flux passing through a defined area that is perpendicular to the direction of the flux. Okay? And the formula is given as D is equals to epsilon naught, epsilon R E. If it is in free space, then epsilon R will not be there. If it is in some other medium, then your epsilon R will be present. So this is a very common thing which we all know. And that is why what you get is the formula is D is equals to Q by 4 pi R square into AR. So electric flux density also gives a measure of the strength of an electric field generated by free electric charge corresponding to the number of electric lines of force passing through a given area. Another definition for it is in a very short and other ways, it is the amount of flux passing through a defined area. I've already mentioned it, or passing through unit area perpendicular to the direction of the flux. Okay. D is basically, quite similar to E, and the direction will also remain the same. The phasor remains the same. The vector in which E remains is also same. Electric flux density at any point in the electric field of the body is also defined as the number of lines of force passing through a unit surface area at that point. Okay, so let's move ahead, and this then forms the basic fundamental for Gauss law. So the next topic that comes in is basically electric flux density will be has got a major application in Gauss law. So you need to go through electric flux density if you want to enter into the Gauss law. So the statement of Gauss law states that total electric flux coming out of a closed surface is proportional to the charge enclosed by the surface itself. So you have got these formulas which are there. There is a long derivation which accompanies this Gauss law. So psi is the symbol for the flux there. We have got surface integration ds, that is ds is the component of d along the surface, and you integrate it, is equal to q. Another way is that since we say that the total electric flux coming out of the closed surface is proportional to the charge enclosed by the surface, then the charge is given by q, and for a very small volume we already saw that the value of q is given as integration of volume rho v dv. So this is how Gauss law does come into picture, and this is the formula that we usually use at many of the places. So you need to go it by heart, and you need to understand as to how the Gauss law is represented actually. In some of the cases, in some of the questions, it is quite easy and you can easily solve them. But in some cases, they will not mention Gauss law, so you need to understand it through the statement. So somewhere down the line, you need to correlate the statement as well as the law with it. Okay, so you need to know that the upper formula is also for Gauss law, the lower one is also for Gauss law, and the last one that I mentioned is again for Gauss law only. Okay, so you need to you know interrelate all these things and keep it in your mind and answer accordingly. Now there is a question again here where you can ponder and you can think whenever you have got time. Since we are running out of time, I am also moving ahead with the slides. The why does the flux crossing a surface is dependent on the normal component of D only? Why not any other component? See what we have written in the statement is proportional to the charge enclosed by the surface, right? But what kind of a charge are we talking about? What kind of an electric flux? This electric flux, when it comes out, it is usually in the perpendicular direction. So why do we assume it in the perpendicular direction only? Anyways, then when you go ahead with this Gauss law, when you move ahead with it, the next topic that immediately follows Gauss law is divergence. Both are dependent on each other. It is quite similar if you just have a look. See the last formula here, right? Limit this is d dot ds. You'll have to go into derivations to better understand the relation between the Gauss law and divergence. But here I have mentioned this formula for that sake only. That limit as the volume tends to zero, surface integration d dot ds is equals to nothing but rho v, which we have brought it here. If you go in the reverse way, integration, you get this thing, and then this dv goes down as del v, and this is. Now, if you replace this capital D with capital A for any vector, Gauss law specifically states about electric flux. Let us assume any other thing. So we have assumed it as capital A. So if you go by capital A, then divergence is written as del dev A is equals to limit as del v tends to zero, surface integration A dot ds divided by del v, which is similar to this one. Now, if we write it as A or if we write it as D, I had already mentioned this in the previous class. If it is in bold, it is a vector. So here we can see that this is a vector. This S is a vector, D is not a vector. This is again a vector. So whether I write it as capital A, whether I write it as D, a vector is a vector, and then we go for how it is represented in different coordinate systems. So in different coordinate systems, what we have is div D is given as in rectangular or Cartesian. We have the first formula. Then the second one is in cylindrical. Then the third one is in spherical. Now, EMF turns out to be quite tough whenever you go for your normal studies or you go for a gate also. It is quite dangerous as far as the feedback is considered. The reason is very simple. Number one, it is all imaginary, electric field lines, everything, this and that, and obviously we cannot see it in practical as to what is happening. So that is obviously there. The other point is basically divided into two parts. Number one, we have got multiple representations for the same thing. Same quantity will be represented by different representations as we move from reference to reference. But in that same point, the other problem is with this formulas. If you just have a look, the size of the formulas are quite huge and you need to remember them. Remember them while understanding them as well. So this is a very important thing that you need to understand. You need to remember all these things. What is the formula for div D in Cartesian? What is the formula for divergence in cylindrical? What is the formula in spherical? Then the other part is, why do we basically apply divergence theorem? This question should come up into your mind, and you will get a beautiful answer if you really ponder over it and understand as to where divergence is being used. Anyways, let me just put in certain points here which are very important. The first point, a positive divergence of a vector indicates a source, whereas a negative divergence indicates a sink. Sink means where the lines are converging. Source means where the lines are emanating from. So a positive divergence of a vector will basically indicate that it is a source, whereas the negative will indicate it is a sink. Divergence is performed on a vector, however, the result will be a scalar, as we can see from there. See here, if you just have a look, this will give me a scalar quantity, this will also give me a scalar quantity, this will also give me a scalar quantity. This itself is a scalar value. There is no direction there. There is no unit vector involved, there is no vector as such involved. The components or the coefficients of the vectors are involved. But the vector itself is not involved anywhere, right? Then the third point, divergence will give an essence of how much flux is leaving or entering a small volume without indicating the specific direction. So this is again important. And this comes in when you actually, go for further research onto this thing. This is the basic fundamental that you need to know. The last thing is, as I said, it is not only applicable to electric flux density. And then it is also given as del D also. It's given by a triangle and all of it. Anyways, you can study it in your references wherever you do want to. So then, as we are running out of time, let us keep on moving to newer and newer topics. The next topic is electric field and potential. I just take a minute out here. Just 1 minute. So when we talk about, in the previous one, you have got one del operator which is there, which is given by an inverse triangle. In this case, the divergence is also given as, let me just check if I can show it to you. It is also given as a reverse triangle. Okay? So this itself is a vector, and this is given as, just a second, I'll just show it to you if possible. I'm unable to see the. So what we have here is the del is a vector, and then when we actually go for divergence, you go for a dot product. So when you go for a dot product, the dot product of two vectors becomes a scalar, right? So this is given as del by, okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is how you, sorry. Let me just make it proper. Okay. So this is a Z again, huh? This is okay. So this is how it is given. So this is a vector. Then when we go for the dot product, it becomes like this. This is a vector. This is a vector. The dot product of two vectors will be a scalar. So this is how you move ahead with it. Just a second. So this is where we were. Then let us move to electric field and potential. Okay. And before we go into that, we need to remember that these things are basically to be learned by heart. Now, what we have studied is simple shapes, uniform charge density cases, and this is quite easy to solve, right? Then we will go for potential. When we go for it, basically the electric field intensity deals with static charge. Now, if we attempt to move a charge in a field, we will have to expend energy, right? You have to do work. If you are moving one charge from one position to the other position, you have to do work. This energy will be positive when I am moving against the field because I am feeding the energy, and it will be negative when I am moving in the direction of the field. Okay, so there are formulas related to it. Then you get the formula for the work done. Basically, that is given as the same formula which is there for potential difference. It is given, but with a charge involved in it. Okay, and that is the formula that we get for the work done when we are moving from the initial position to the final position. So the charge is supposed to be at rest at the initial position also and at the final position also. And if the field is uniform, then E can be taken out of the integration because then it's basically not required. Otherwise, I'll go for integration. So the work done is given as W is equals to minus Q integration initial position to the final position E dot TL. And if you very calmly listen to what I'm saying, this is the same formula that we can see into potential difference. The only thing is that the Q is not there. Okay, so let us move and see what happens when we go for potential difference. It is defined as the work done by an external source in moving a unit positive charge from one point to another in an electric field. So if we are talking about unit positive charge, the Q becomes 1, and that is why it is not visible here. So it's gone from here. Okay. So usually what happens is we assume that the initial position is given by B and the final position is given by capital A. The unit for potential difference is joules per coulomb, or it is taken as volts usually. Right? And then if we go for derivation, what we get is the formula for VAB is given as Q by 4 pi epsilon naught into bracket 1 by RA minus 1 by RB. However, if we assume that B is at infinity, then we get a formula which is present there. So that gives the potential of the point A, right? VA is equal to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught RA. Then the potential due to point line spherical charges are derived as I have shown it in the bottom. So the point is, we cannot put in everything into the slides and we cannot go through everything in the slides. I have tried to put in as many formulas which are relevant, and that is why you need to just again go through it. This is just an introduction for electromagnetic potential, electromagnetic fields. Then usually when we go for derivation, you will find that Q is placed at the origin. You need to understand why, because usually we do measure R from origin. If it is not measured from origin, then maybe then another question: how much work will be expended? Means what will be the value of W? W is nothing but V, means V is equals to W by Q. So if we take it for a single Q, value of Q is equals to 1, then W and V are same. Then in that case, what will be the work done in moving a unit charge along the equipotential surface? Right? So this is a really good question. You need to think over it, and you will be surprised to get the answer also. Then lastly, before we move ahead, the output of this would be a scalar quantity. Okay, the potential of the point is a scalar quantity here. Then there's something called as potential gradient also here, but let us not go into it because this will take a lot of time. But there is something called as potential gradient, which is basically at the end you get it as E is equals to minus gradient of V. Right? So that is one of the derivations that you get at the end of it. Let us not go into it. It is usually given as E is equals to minus del, which I just showed it to you, into V, and then you will find it out based on it. And there is something called as electric dipole also. Okay, electric dipole again is very much important when we are studying the potential difference. Dipole stands for two charges placed very close to each other and having opposite charges with same magnitude. So in that case, how the dipole will behave, this is again a very important thing. there's a big derivation involved with it and all of it, and there is something called as a torque also, which is involved with the dipole. So then it gives a dipole moment to the thing itself, and then that further leads to a combination of dipoles. So when we talk of combination of dipoles, then there again another thing that comes up is the energy density, and that is applied to electrostatic field. So that is a big derivation that can be explored on your time, and then further with that, with this much of knowledge, then you can expand to going up to boundary conditions of conductor. I believe I think so I've taken it, but anyways, you can just go and search it out if possible for you. So this is how it goes. I'm sorry, this is what it was there earlier also, which I just told you. So E is equals to minus grad V. Here it is given. So this is how electric field potential and this is derived. And these are its representation in Cartesian and cylindrical and spherical thing. Again, here you need to remember. So basically, if you remember the value of del, then divergence can also be learned out, and then you can learn out what we said, the gradient also. Okay. Then I have a slide for dipole also. Just go through it. So that these are the end derivation contents. This is a dipole here, where this is one charge, this is another charge. The value of D is very small. They are separated by a very small distance as compared to the value of R. And then you check out for all the other things which I have already mentioned. Let's move ahead with this. And then you have got something called as boundary conditions. As I told you, this is boundary conditions for conductors. There are other boundary conditions also. I suggest that you go through them whenever you have got time. This is how the things work out when we are on the boundaries of two conductors. Anyways, and these are all derivations. Right now we cannot spend time on it. Let us move to the capacitors and how the electric medium will basically affect. Let us start with how effect of dielectric medium comes in, and then we can move to the capacitor. So what we have is, you see, these are two simple plates, conducting plates. On one side you have got positive charges, the other side you have got negative charges. If it is placed in free space, the formula is very simple. C is equals to epsilon naught A by D. And I believe this is a very simple formula which you might have gone through even in 12th. Now what happens is, if I put in the dielectric medium, then suddenly the formula will change, because the dielectric medium will then itself bring in some changes to it, and the capacitance will now be given as C is equals to epsilon naught epsilon R A by D. Epsilon R is added up. And some of the cases, some of the references to be verified, this epsilon R is also represented by K, capital K. So you need to be very much aware of these things. Otherwise, you will, in the exam, you may be looking for epsilon R because you have studied it from particular reference. The person who has set the paper might have studied it from some other reference, but the terminology should match. Then the capacitance which comes up, this is a very simple thing. Actually, there are 2 to 3 topics which are very simple, like capacitance is there, inductance is there. So let us not spend more time on it. Capacitance is the ratio of the amount of electric charge stored in a conductor to a difference in electric potential. So you have got C is equals to Q by V. V is the electric potential, Q is the electric charge, C is your. Now the basic fundamental that you need to understand is, see, this course comes up as a base course. You develop your fundamentals about the field theory and other things, means the basics related to it. The point is, from here you learn the basics, like in maths you learn matrices, you learn trigonometry, you learn many other things. So on its own, if you think, so matrices does not make any sense. Why should I learn matrices? Because it does not make sense to me. But later on, as you go on studying, you find out that matrices have got big applications. So that is why we need to study it in the base courses. Similarly, this particular topic also comes up as a base course. So what we are studying as capacitance here, it may appear to be very negligible, useless kind of a thing, but later on in the specifically in the electrical and electronics field, capacitance plays a very important role. So we need to be very much aware as to what is happening, right? And how it can be applied, how a particular phenomenon is happening and how it can be applied at different places. So capacitance can also be considered as a phenomena which happens in a given situation. The situation is if there are two conducting bodies separated by a distance, one having a positive charge, the other one having a negative charge, then the phenomena of capacitance can be observed. It is not necessary that we always have plates, we always have some kind of, equal things. So then this particular thing can be really enjoyed. Okay, anyways, let us move to the next topic, that is Biot-Savart law. We have got half an hour only remaining and I've got some more slides to cover up. So Biot-Savart law, basically, there's not much to it as far as the usual understanding goes. However, if you go later on, you'll obviously find some applications for them also. So Biot-Savart law, the best part is if it is a theoretical question, the formula itself plays the statement also. And the problems are also quite easy. I shouldn't say so, but as compared to other topics, the problems in Biot-Savart law are fundamentally easy. Anyways, at any point P, the statement says, at any point P, the magnitude of the magnetic field intensity, that is H, produced. This is a bigger point actually. In Biot-Savart law, you need to understand what stands for what. Right? Electric field intensity is H produced by the differential element is proportional to the product of the current given by I, the magnitude of differential length, that is dl, and the sign. Why we are talking about sign is because we have got a cross product. So when we expand the cross product, we have got a sign of the angle lying between the filament and which we can see in the figure itself, and the line connecting the filament and the point at which the field is desired or where we are finding the field. Also, the magnitude of the magnetic field intensity is inversely proportional to the square of distance from the differential element to the point P. Right? So, just because the direction comes up, if we just have a look here, this r square, this direction combined will give me this particular thing. Right? So, r is the vector from this point to this point, from the line to the point, and now, again, what we see here is there can be many questions which can be generated. What position will give me the least field intensity? How can I find it? Should it be very near to the point, then we get the least intensity, or should we be far away from the point to get the least intensity? That is for you to explore. And then there is another thing where you get it as line integral of the same thing. So for the whole line, then I can find the Biot-Savart law because of whole line. Now, if I go by Biot-Savart law, let me tell you, this will really take a long time, and that is why we cannot get into the details of it. But let us move to the next one, that is the Ampere's law. Again, in Ampere's law, I'll have to go a little bit faster because we are running out of time somewhere. The derivations involved in Ampere-Circuital law are quite huge, but it has got a really good application here and there. So the statement of Ampere-Circuital law is line integral of H, that is, as we saw in the previous derivation law. Here, that is magnetic field intensity. So the line integral of magnetic field intensity about any closed path which is given by that integration sign is exactly equal to the direct current enclosed by that path here. If we just have a look again, this is something similar to Gauss law. There we were talking about enclosed charge. Here we are talking about enclosed current. So if I integrate the direct current enclosed by a given path, then means integrate the electric field, magnetic field. integrate edge along a closed path, then the current that it encloses is what I get. If I go for an infinite line current, this is what I get. Okay, if I go for the infinite sheet current, this is what I get. If I go for infinite long coaxial transmission line, this is what I get. This is for a toroid, this is for a solenoid. So there are so many applications of Ampere circuital law for different kinds of shapes, for different kinds of combinations that we have, even considering coaxial cable. Again, there are so many variations which may come up. So it's better that you go through the concept of it rather than rote learning the derivations. Okay, that will help you. Now, what is a solenoid? Solenoid is nothing but a bar, conducting bar, on which we have wound a wire which is carrying current. So that is a solenoid. A toroid is a circular core along which we have put on the wires. That is a toroid. Then let us move to the next topic, that is the curl. Curl again comes up based on the previous calculations and previous things that you have studied, you get the curl. So when you apply Ampere circuital law to the perimeter of a differential surface element, then when you go into the details of that derivation, you find out that there is another combination that comes up which is called as the curl. So this curl of any vector, I cannot go into that derivation right now, but the curl of any vector is a vector, and any component of the curl is given by the limit of the quotient of the closed line integral of the vector about a small path. So if you go through any of the references, you can see that path also. They usually mention it and show it through a figure in a plane normal to that component desired and the area enclosed as the path shrinks to 0. This is quite important because you find that this happened in Gauss law also, where we were saying that limit del v tends to 0. Here we are saying limit Sn tends to 0. So curl n is equals to limit del Sn into this divided. And then it is usually represented by this particular formula. Curl of a given h is given as del cross h. Okay. And then another representation for it is how do we calculate it, because cross is given like this. So del, you already know, this is how it happens. The problem will come up if you go for any other coordinate system. If it is a rho, a phi, a z, then this will also change. If you go for AR, A theta, A phi, again this will change. So the second line is very important here. These are nothing but the coefficients of the vector that we are considering for the curl. And then you have got, then you have got these formulas which are for different systems. The first one is for Cartesian, the second one is for cylindrical, third one is for spherical. Now, within an R, we can see how the size of the formulas are varying. And you need to, either learn it by heart or you need to understand as to how these formulas are generated. And you need to even implement it at the time of your examination with very small amount of time remaining. Then I would suggest that if you have got really some time, then you go for some exploration as to how divergence can be applied into magnetic circuits. You can even explore point form of Ampere circuital law. Anyhow, you'll have to learn it. And how Maxwell's equations are related based on Ampere circuital law and all of it. The next thing is Stokes theorem is not in the course as I have seen it. Maybe if the course is wrong, that is why I tried to push in as many topics as I could. So Stokes theorem is the next one. So Stokes theorem is basically given by this formula, and it is basically derived from the above laws itself. The Ampere circuital law and Biot-Savart law, it is derived from there itself. And based on the above observations of Gauss law and all of it, we get this particular equation. Then let us go to Faraday's law. But before we go into Faraday's law, let me just tell you there are some more topics which I couldn't cover up, like magnetic flux, then the magnetic flux density, which is there. Maybe we'll see it in the Maxwell's equations, but they are also there. Then what is magnetic potential again? That is another thing. So I've even noted it down. If in case I have just missed out, you can just search it on your own. So at the last slide, I'll give you some of the topics which have not been covered but are considered important in electromagnetic fields. However, let us move to the Faraday's law. This is a very simple law that we have. Just a second. So the Faraday's law is basically was obviously designed by Faraday, as we all know. The name itself is telling me the same thing. The other thing is here, what we get from the equation is E is equals to N d phi by dt. Okay, and this particular thing is based on the effect of magnets and the coil carrying conductor. So the basic law that we have is how a magnetic field will interact with an electric circuit, as I told you. So this particular phenomena is defined by the Faraday's law. It will show how, based on the coil, how the movement of the magnet can be and all of it, and how the conductor will be exposed in case the magnetic field is changing. And then from this particular law itself, you can go up to Lenz's law also, which states the same thing but with a negative sign, which is minus N d phi by dt for Lenz's law. Okay, so the basic experiment which was there was that the Faraday took a magnet and a coil and he connected a galvanometer, right? And then the magnet was at rest, so there was no deflection in the galvanometer. But as soon as the magnet started to move, then he observed that there were some changes in the galvanometer. That means some current was flowing in the coil. So he concluded that because of the movement of the magnet, he was getting some current. So he then created certain laws, and which are called as Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction. We cannot go into all of them, but there are at least two laws which are there. The first law says that any change in the magnetic field of a coil of wire will cause an EMF to be induced in the coil. So that means if there is a change in magnetic field, as I told you, this EMF is induced is called an induced EMF, and the other law states that the magnitude of EMF induced in the coil is equal to the rate of change of flux, which is given by d phi by dt here. That linkages with the coil. The flux linkage of the coil is the product of number of turns and the flux associated with the coil. So that is what we have seen here also. Then let us move to the next one. I'm taking this quite a little bit faster because we don't have time, and I believe that you have studied Faraday's law in the 12th also. Now in Lorentz force, as far as my knowledge goes, as far as I have seen, there are other representations also, but this is one of the representations of it. Particle of Q, that is charge, moving with a velocity of v in an electric field E and magnetic field B experiences a force which is given by the Lorentz force. This is the formula for it. So I have explained all the terms involved in that formula, and you can see how they are related to each other. There is a cross product and there is a multiplication and all of it. However, what we can come out of it is that Q is proportional to F, and then F is also proportional to the product of Q as well as a combination of E plus B cross B. Okay, so this is another thing. However, I haven't found much numericals onto the Lorentz force. Then inductance, I had to cover it because it was there in the syllabus. So, again, inductance is a really big topic if you want to go into the details of it. But we assume that you have already studied it, you already know quite a lot about it, and that is why I'm just carrying it with this formula only. So the inductance is given by phi by I. It is measured in Henry. Inductance is a tendency of an inductor to oppose the change of oppose a change in the electric current flowing through it. That's it. The symbol is L, as we can see, and we assume here that the number of turns is equal to 1. Then we'll go and explore it further. Usually this is not the only formula that we have. So then for self-inductance, we go for this particular formula that we have. Yeah, but L is equals to N phi by I. Again, this is inductance because of the inductor itself, and it is dependent on number of turns of the inductor, then the flux induced and the current flowing. There are other things also which can be added up here. One is what kind of a material is being used in the core, and the shape of the core is also important. Then when we go for mutual inductance, it is given by mu, which is a product of mu 0 and mu r, and multiplication of the number of coils at both the places, and A and L have their usual meaning that you know. The point here is means A stands for the cross-sectional area. It is given usually in meters square, and L is the length of the coil. It is given in meters. Mutual inductance will come up when there are two coils. So let us just have a small comparison also. Self-inductance is the characteristic of the coil itself. Other coil does not interfere with it. Whereas in mutual inductance, it is a characteristics because of a pair of coils between two coils. More than that can also be considered there. Then the inductance, the induced current usually will oppose the change in current. Means the induced current usually opposes the reduction in current in the coil when the main current reduces in self-inductance, whereas this may or may not happen in a mutual inductance. Neighboring coil, it may be positive, it may be negative also. So, and the bigger problem here, a bigger issue here is in mutual inductance. Basically, the inductance is dependent on the other coil as well. So then there is a big derivation which is there, and then there are a number of examples and questions also. So you can just explore all these things whenever you've got time. Let us move to another topic, that is magnetomotive force. The magnetomotive force is defined as the magnetic pressure that sets up the magnetic flux in a magnetic circuit, and this is called as the magnetomotive force. Now, MMF, in many of the places I have seen it is taken as analogous to EMF in the electrical circuit, but then there are a number of differences which are there. So, the current flowing in an electric circuit is due to the existence of EMF. Similarly, again, MMF is required to drive the magnetic flux in the magnetic circuit, and this is the reason where EMF and MMF are equated. But again, as I said earlier also, there are a number of differences also. The unit for MMF is ampere turns or Gilbert. Gilbert usually you won't find in the references. The strength of the MMF is equivalent to the product of the current around the turns and the number of turns of the coil. So, how much of current is there and the number of coils is also important. As per one of the laws which I have studied, MMF is defined as the work done in moving unit magnetic pole once around in a magnetic circuit. So it's very simple. Magnetic pole will have unit probably in Weber. It's very similar to having 1 ampere of current moving through the circuit. electric circuit. Here we are saying MMF is defined as the work done in moving unit magnetic pole once around the magnetic circuit. Okay, and let's then move to the next topic. Then comes up reluctance. Reluctance is basically, it's defined as the ratio of MMF to the magnetic flux. MMF is what we just saw, and reluctance is analogous to the resistance in electric circuit. So EMF divided by I is what we have. Usually in an electric circuit, you have here is as MMF divided by the flux. Flux is again analogous to the current in the electric circuit. It also represents the opposition to the magnetic flux, and magnetic reluctance in the magnetic circuit is I'm not getting the exact word. Anyways, so if I get it, I'll just get back to it. Magnetic flux passing through a given reluctance does not give rise to dissipation of heat as it does in the current here. So there are differences also. That is what I had been saying earlier also. Magnetic circuit can have analogous terms to electric circuits, but then there is some different things are also there. So reluctance, if you remember, I had taken up one slide having the people who have worked in the field of EMF. So there was one guy called as Oliver Heaviside. So he was responsible for coining the term of reluctance. That is why I had added his name. Then if you obviously have gone through reluctance, it would be also good for you to go through something called as permeance, which is inverse of reluctance. And then I would also request you to go through some of the applications of reluctance, right? Then the magnetic circuits is actually a topic there, and I've just brought them just from Wikimedia Commons, just to show as to how an electric magnetic circuit looks like. But anyways, magnetic circuit is a very huge topic, and given the time limit, I don't think I'll be able to cover it here. But anyways, a magnetic circuit will go through the coil and a conductor as an electric current flows. You have got magnetic flux intensity, density, you have got reluctance, you have got permeance, you have got leakage, flux is there, and so many things are there. And then there is division also, which is there. This is a simple circuit which is shown. How it gets divided into parallel circuit, that can also be seen, especially if we study the shell type transformer and all of it. So there are multiple applications also and multiple usage also. So you can just go through it at your leisure. Right now, I don't think we'll be able to cover it. The next thing is continuity equation of this. Actually, from Biot-Savart law, you can say we have gone to the next level. And just one slide to take that particular topic is not enough. Okay. So anyways, continuity equation, as the statement goes, if a charge is moving out of a differential volume, then the amount of charge within the volume is going to decrease. So the rate of change of charge density is negative. That is termed as continuity equation. These are the equations which will represent it. And again, there are many extensions and applications in these topics. So we need to explore that part. Excuse me. The continuity equation amounts to also the conservation of charge. It gives me how the charge is conserved. If magnetic monopoles exist, there would be continuity equation for monopole currents as well. But usually we do assume that this thing does not happen. See the monopole. Monopole means a single pole, right? So usually we don't assume that there is a single pole. Even if there is another pole, it may be at infinity. This is what we do assume. Okay. The second formula here, del dot G is in the differential form. The same thing in differential form. Now, if you study continuity equation, then you need to also know something called as displacement current. Okay. Without that, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to understand the basic concept of the continuity equation. And then there are modified Ampere circuital laws there, and there are modified versions of it, and there are so many other things that you can go through whenever you have got time. As I told you, it's not possible to cover all the topics right now. So then let us move to the next topic, that is Maxwell's equations. These are the Maxwell's equations, and this is in steady state in point form. This is the point. This one is the point form. This is the integral form. Again, Maxwell equations, you have to learn it, and specifically when it comes up to the application. These are some of the laws also. If you just go back a little bit and study it, you'll find that these are certain laws also. Like del dot V, del dot D is equals to rho V, del cross H is equals to J. These are laws by itself. So Maxwell has gathered these equations. He has presented them in point form, or point form is also termed as differential, and the integral form. There the integrations can be visualized. So this is in steady state. The next one is for time varying fields, how it changes. So this is how you get the results for it. Again, if you go by this, as a student, even for me, EMF was very tough. You can just imagine learning so many equations and to understand, because in the numerical, they won't say that this is the particular thing that we're going to use, right? So to understand and to imply that you have to use a particular equation for a given problem, it becomes quite tough. And specifically, again, then there are certain vectors, there are scalars. That itself creates a problem. I've seen students who get answers in vector, whereas the quantity is actually scalar. So even a small mistake here and there creates a very big problem. Like if you just remove this dot here, the meaning itself fully changes. So here, obviously, if I know what is this, it's quite easy for me to understand. But in some other situation where I'm required to derive, or when I'm solving some numerical, there are chances that I may forget this thing. Anyways, and then I just move to the last slide. And these are some of the equations, some of the topics which have been left off, and I don't think I've even mentioned them. Other topics I mentioned that these are the topics that you should go through. So Laplace equation is there, Poisson's equation is there. Poisson's equation and Laplace equations are approximately same. In one you get the output as density, and in the other one you get it as 0. And then there are certain rules also related to it. Then there is polarization and energy of electromagnetic waves. Actually, these are the topics from where you start the application of EMF. Okay. And then you have got Poynting theorem, and you have got Hall effect. Hall effect again comes up as an extension for Lorentz force. If you study Lorentz force and then move ahead, you get Hall effect. Linear and non-linear magnetic systems. Actually, I was even planning to take up some numericals, but there is a lack of time, and I don't think I'll be able to cover up 25 numericals. Anyways, I'll just move on for that. So this is for theory. As far as the theory is considered, let me just go through some of the numericals here. I'll suggest that whenever you are studying, don't take tension. Just